today is Feel It Friday.
Okay.
And it's the notion of, what's alive for you, what's magical for you, what's inspirational for you, and how could sharing that with other people watching help the world to be a better place, basically.
Very good.
Yeah. How are you? Where are you?
I'm in Milwaukee. I'm in my little tiny home right now.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I'm doing well. And it's an interesting time to be in a place like this. I'm going to actually just shift this so that I can stay plugged in because I'm noticing my excuse me a minute. My
Okay.
Mac just kind of came unplugged and I'm going to need it plugged in to make sure I have enough power for this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Power it up.
I'm powered up. Yeah, and can you hear me okay with the microphone? I've got
Perfect.
this little mic
Perfect.
here, so very good. I think, uh-oh, hold on a second. It did come out. I knew it was going to come out of the wall here. I had to rearrange where I'm at.
So for those of you watching, I met Ragani when I was producing Bhakti Fest, and she's a phenomenal kirtan yogini, and
Yes.
and hilariously funny and creative, and
Oh, if you got any
much taller than you think she is.
if you got any scope, I guess you can rewind now that it's a video. You can see how badly dressed I am. I have only the top on. The bottom is still my PJs from the
No, that's
morning.
fine. I'm naked from the bottom down.
Oh,
So,
pictures or it never happened.
exactly. It goes. I go fully dressed from the top, then just fully naked from the bottom.
Right.
So, Ragani, tell us about yourself, what you're doing, what's alive for you at the moment. What's your magic?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting journey, with all of the things that are going on right now. But I have to say it's in some ways perfectly timed because I see it having brought a lot of the world to a full stop. And so my background, I'd say, if I could put it all in a nutshell, it has to do with yoga, but yoga not in the sense of most people, when they think of yoga, they think of the asanas or the postures or, going to a yoga class. But I mean yoga in the bigger sense of everything that can relate to life is tied into yoga. So when we talk about doing asanas, it's so that we can sit longer in meditation and we can actually then quiet the mind and cease all of what we call the modulations of the mind to become completely still. And so that practice of yoga then goes to everything in life that we would use that would facilitate that. So I would say
Maybe
yeah, go ahead.
maybe you explain what asanas are to people who might not know.
Asanas are postures. So when people say like Shavasana is the corpse posture, which by the way is, they say, one of the hardest to master, even though all of us think that it's the easiest. We lay down and boom, right? But
Right.
Shavasana is actually when you could cease to be in your physical form. You could actually lift out of your body at that point in Shavasana and leave. The mastery of Shavasana is not just about laying flat in the pose and falling asleep, but
Right.
anyway, so asana that is at the end of the name of the postures refers to posture or the position or the pose that we would assume.
Okay.
So a lot of the yoga these days, when I got involved with some of the yoga tradition, I was back in the single digits of my life. And now there's a lot more people
You're
doing.
older than 100. Is that what you're saying?
Right?
That's great.
Oh, it was just merely 10 years ago. Yes. Now, yoga, you see a lot of things happening with yoga. There's all kinds of branches. There's people that have patented. I remember the first time, in fact, back in the 80s, I think it was, or 90s, where I went to a yoga conference, and I was so excited because I had never, I kind of was in the ashram all those other earlier years. So
Grew up in an ashram?
I didn't grow up in it, but I spent all of my summers there. So I met my teacher when I was 8 years old, and his name was Swami Rama, and he had an ashram in Pennsylvania, later, opened and did a number of things in India, started a hospital there. And so when I was in high school, I started spending my summers there, and my friends, I'm sure, they thought I was going nuts or going to a nunnery, or they thought I was going to shave my head and come back. They had all kinds of jokes for it. But I used to think, if they really knew what was going on there, they would have come with me. If they really understood
Mhm.
what I was seeing there and what I was understanding, with the yoga practices. And so the asanas are the poses. I'd say it's kind of the entry level for people to come into the yoga world because it's something we can do with our body. We can work with it. And then you have the meditation and the breathing, which are also part of those, phases of beginning the yoga. But once you start that, then there's the practice of being able to quiet the mind and going through the stages of developing the practices of meditation. And those are what I consider the essence of yoga, that all the rest of it is kind of practice. We're just trying to get to that place.
Right. So you're saying yoga is the practice that you do to basically get you closer to your real meditation?
Yoga is all of that. Yes, the practice and the union, once you're in that meditation or that place where your mind is still and you've quieted everything, that's the modifications of the mind are what keep us in this turbulence of the world. And so when we cease that and when we come to a place where that stillness happens, and it's not something that it's said that we don't do it to ourselves, we do our best effort, and at some point grace dawns. And when that grace dawns, that's when things open up. And so our practice, our job, my job, so to speak, is to continue that practice to keep that groove going so that at some point the soil is ready so that when the sparks hit, it can open up and that can awaken. So the practice of yoga, but people always will say things like, "Oh, do you do yoga?" And it's kind of like, I don't know how to answer it because yoga isn't really a verb. You don't do yoga, or it's a way of living or a way of life. So I consider myself a yogi, even if I'm not doing the postures, because it's a way of how do you speak to people? What are the ethics or the practices you're living with yourself? Are you living with integrity? Do things line up? So you can see lots of people doing the postures, but it may not be that they're developing those other aspects of themselves, which you also have to develop, because if you don't, when you go to sit for meditation, guess what's going to start to interrupt you? Oh, I probably shouldn't have said that to that guy today. Yeah. And then you start thinking about stuff. Oh, I probably I could have done that a little better. That really wasn't the best things. Things start to kind of bother you when you're sitting in meditation. So these practices were meant to give you a fullness so that when you sit for meditation, you can have a clear path and really go further with your stillness.
And it's very interesting. I like the way you put it. It's exactly how I would talk about yoga. How do you see, like the difference between yoga as a practice of moving towards meditation and say some Buddhist mantra type practice where they're not doing yogic postures so much as just sitting and meditating? How would you equate those two together? And what would fit one person over the other?
Well, I think there's many paths going up to the top of the mountain. And sometimes when somebody's on one side of the mountain shouting, "This is the way, this is the way, this is the only way," it's because they can't see through the mountain to the other side to realize, what they're paddling upstream in a boat. There's not even a river on the other side of the mountain. There's a forest there. So somebody's walking in a different path to get up. So I think there's a lot of ways to quiet the mind. To think that there's only one method is a fallacy. I'm really steeped in the practices of yoga, and I feel they answer every question that I could possibly ever have. So it makes sense to me. The field of yoga, or the tantric field, which is, even bigger, encompasses for me the Ayurvedic practices and all of those holistic practices that we'd have. So depending upon what someone's drawn to, your dharma, or whatever it is that you have, that you were born in this life, dharma meaning your purpose or your path in this life, you'll have an inclination for something that you're meant to be doing. You'll have an inclination already towards what draws you to certain people, to certain paths, and follow that. So, no need to force yourself into a square box if you're not, if you're round.
Right.
Yoga, in a sense, may not be for everybody, that kind of path or the way that is practiced. And yet I feel there's a way that you can answer anything that somebody's struggling with through yoga, or through the Buddhist meditations, or using mantras. There's mantra sciences in the yoga science as well. Right. It's not something outside of that.
You just started to talk about, before I rudely interrupted you, this notion of going to the conference and seeing yoga poses.
Oh, yes. Well, it probably wasn't the most flattering of descriptions I was going to say, but I was so excited to go to this conference. And I remember I went to a workshop that was it was called Ashtanga Yoga. And I was so excited. I thought, I can't believe someone's actually going to talk about Ashtanga. And we went into this workshop and they did a bunch of poses over and over and over. It was basically what we know in the modern world as like Ashtanga Yoga, where it's a lot of downward dog and whatnot. And I walked out of there, I thought, what the heck was that? And because Ashtanga actually means the 8 limbs of yoga. So it's the Raja Yoga path. So I thought someone was going to talk about what we say as the yamas and niyamas, which are the restraints, the observances, the way to be. And I was excited to learn something or see what was there. And the Ashtanga Yoga class that I went to was, so my point being with that is that there's a lot of things being patented or taught about what yoga is. So people say, oh yeah, I do Ashtanga, but that's not the tradition of it. They do the patented Ashtanga that somebody took the word and put it on these series of poses that then, is Ashtanga. And that actually serves some people to do those series, but it's not the Ashtanga in the, the traditional sense of 8 limbs.
Right. So so you see clients? What do you see clients for? And
I do. I see clients. What's that?
And you do them digitally now as well?
Yes, well, I'm doing both now because of obviously the coronavirus thing that's happened. But I'm still seeing in my office, and I have a very different protocol now. I use masks, gloves, everything's all suited up. But I still see a few clients, very few, for acupuncture and mostly for pain. I also work with people that have difficulties in understanding what their symptoms are about to get a better sense of what about my life is adding to that and continuing those symptoms, because I don't see them separate as what somebody's living from what they're experiencing in their body physically. Right. And that's probably one of my biggest areas of specialty, is working with people that want to understand what is it connected to. And it's amazing what people will come up with and what they connect the dots. And I have no idea what they'll find. I don't have a recipe for, saying, well, if you have this, it means this. But they come to that conclusion of whatever the connection is. And it's phenomenal. Watching this process. So by phone, I do more consulting work, and those are obviously easier to do now. And I actually, in fact, had closed a few of them, finished a few of the people I was working with. So some things opened up, and I was excited to have things, and then this whole virus thing happened. So now I think people are feeling afraid or, not sure what they want to do with their time and energy and money right now. But what I'm doing with the consulting stuff is helping people that feel they're struggling with, especially emotional and spiritual paradigms or issues in their life, and they feel they can't break through, or they can't get to that point where they feel they're actually living in a life that has spirit and has purpose and has value. And those are some of the areas I really like working with clients like that. There's a lot of power, I think, when people come to see themselves as a spiritual being, truly, and not just that it's the priest or somebody outside of themselves that's doing that, but they actually feel when they walk, there's signs and there's things that are going on all the time for them. And I love watching people wake up to that. That's a real joy to work with those kind of clients. And those are more of my premium clients that I see for that. Right. So that's what I'm still doing here.
How do you begin to like create a space for somebody to awaken? Facilitate the space? Where do you start?
Well, I do a little bit of an exploration when we first speak to find out, to hear from them, what is it that feels that they're stuck? Where is it that they're stuck? And what kinds of things would they, if they didn't have those things in the way, where would they want themselves to be? Just to get a little sense of what's going on with them. And then what I often do is I will go through what I kind of consider the mind, body, spirit of their life, the body being the physical world they're living in. And I've sometimes had people take their own laptop and walk around their house if they're like, oh yeah, it's good. I was like, okay, so you've got some clutter in here, or you've got some things that need to be cleaned up, or what kinds of things can we look at? Because if you've got a lot of stuff that isn't going set well in your physical world, it's going to be difficult to sit in meditation and feel that peace with that going on. Right. Just like when people don't eat well or take care of themselves, they go to sit for meditation and they're feeling all this, agitation in their mind and body, and so it doesn't work so well. So that's also true with being able to develop yourself, is having the physical surroundings be conducive to what you want to have. Yeah, so that's the first thing. And then the second is going through the mental, emotional components of that. And I just really have them talk about what kinds of things in their life that they like and what kinds of things in their life they feel they're stuck with, that feels
Mm.
they can't see around. Maybe they've tried counseling before, they've tried some other therapies before. And then we start exploring what those areas are related to, what they're connected to. My background was psychology. That was my degree before. I don't do it as counseling as such, but I really like to do it as a consulting where they're leading the way, but we can kind of guide and facilitate what's going on with those patterns.
It's like a coaching.
Yes, it's coaching. It's a little overused word, I think, with coaching, but that's basically what it is. Yes.
Yeah.
And and then I like to, so for instance, one of the things that I started doing with a woman that I was working with in my office who is now, she's actually a friend of mine. We've started a podcast. We haven't released it yet, but it's got 18 episodes. We're sort of editing and getting it ready. It's called Soul Travelers. And in this particular case, she had an awakening that changed everything in her life. And so now she's started to leave her body and have experiences of going outside of her body. And we talk about this in the podcast, so this isn't, any part of this is not confidential, obviously. But she started leaving her body and didn't know what that was, had never heard of it, never had no context of it. She said, I was just an ordinary kind of person, and then this stuff happened. She describes the experience that led up to it and how she heard the cracks or the knocks in her on her head and on the walls when that was starting. And now what's evolved is the stories that have unfolded from this that are so enriching to me as well as what's going on with her, that what we decided to do was have a podcast where I could tell stories that were happening for me with my teacher that started around that time to really be magnified. They were happening before and they've been happening since, but that was where they really ramped up with him because he was doing things that were extraordinary, you know, appearing in two places at once, having things that, like when people read autobiography of a yogi and wonder, you know, is that really true, or how can that possibly be? When you sit with someone who's a master of yoga, it changes how you feel. It changes how you think about things. We used to say, when I sit with Swamiji, Swamiji was what we used to call him. When I sit with him, I feel I can love everybody in the world. It's like I have no questions. I would actually have to force myself to write a question down if I wanted to go see him, because I'd get in front of him
Right.
and they would disappear
Right. Right.
because everything all was well.
Already perfect.
Exactly. And then I'd leave and I'd go back to my life or go back to what I was doing. I think, oh, but I'm struggling with this. Why didn't I ask him? And because I know I was sitting there and I didn't care. It didn't matter anymore.
It's a very
So,
familiar experience to
right?
me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Kathy, since she's gone through this experience, we started sitting in our office and decided we should do a podcast on this. Extraordinary things that were happening with her as well. For instance, one example that I love this because she started challenging me on the idea of concept of time and space. I've always thought of that as a possibility of it not being linear or not being as I perceive it, but I didn't really have a grasp of how to get outside of that or how to break that paradigm for myself.
Mm.
And I remember she came in one day and told me the story that she had left her body, floated out in the living room, and they had these little lights around their living room, just sort of decorative lights hanging. Her daughter was sitting on the sofa studying for an exam or something. She was out of her body, my friend. She floated through the living room and hit it with her shoulder, bumped the light, and it knocked it off the ceiling while she's out of her body, which was one piece of space that challenged it a little.
Right.
Knocked it off. It hit her daughter, who was sitting below, who looked up and saw nobody, freaked out because they were on hooks. She freaked out and ran into the kitchen where her dad was. Okay, so that happened.
Right.
Now, my client or my friend now comes into the office one day. We're sitting on the sofa and she says, okay, Ragani, so yesterday, I didn't tell you this last week, what happened, but my daughter, I walked in from my office yesterday. Now, this story I just told you happened 3 months ago.
Right.
So this past week, then she goes, as she's telling it, she goes home, she walks into her house, opens the door and sees her daughter sitting in the exact position she was sitting in when she left her body. And she said, oh my goodness. She tells her daughter the story and said, and I floated out, knocked the light off, hit it, you ran in the kitchen, and her daughter's eyes got huge. And she said, Mom, that happened, but it happened yesterday.
Ah. Oh, I see.
So,
So it didn't, the first bit of the story didn't actually happen according to your friend. She didn't know it had happened until she told her daughter about it. And then her daughter said, well, that happened yesterday. Okay. So it's like time travel and out of body experience at the same time.
well, once we know with out of body, because we've commented on this and we're talking about different things in different podcasts that we're doing. One of them is about time. One of them is about like animal totems, different things that we've observed with her going out or with lucid dreaming kinds of patterns.
Right.
And one thing we've talked about is that when you're out of body, you don't experience time as you do here. So you might be experiencing what we would call a past life or something that already happened. But when you're out of body, all of it's accessible. What we would call future or past. It's not linear like it is here. So it's hard to identify sometimes when you see
More
somebody.
quantum.
Yeah, like how do we quantify that? So yeah, so this has been an interesting journey to have with her, and we've had things actually happening in the room while we're sitting there with each other, where we had this dragonfly that actually moved as we're speaking, and we looked at it, and it was still moving, and we just were like, I'm glad you saw that. And anyway, we talk about it on the podcast, a number of these things that are happening, and exploring. I think the idea is not to just share these stories as just stories, but to really open up the conversation within our world about that spiritual realm, because so many of us, when we share a story, even like that story I just shared with you, other people will say, oh, I had something like that happen to me. Or, oh my gosh, my mom told me, I forgot about this. I never told anybody about it. And they'll start sharing stories with us. And the conversation enriches all of us when we hear those stories. So the Soul Traveler podcast, the Soul Travelers are all of us. We're all soul travelers. And we're doing it for the purpose of opening up that conversation. So it's kind of taking even the consultations or the coaching stuff that I do even a little further, because we're opening up into the world, not just one-on-one, but really opening up as a dialogue to invite people to begin sharing those stories and talking about what is that and how does it fit into your paradigm of spirituality or whatever it is that you practice. It certainly fits for me in the world of yoga, but for some people, they have to stretch a little and think, okay, where is it in Catholicism? Well, it's there. It's there in all those major religions. They have those understanding of what that realm of spirit is.
What about that's all fascinating. I'm looking forward. Where are people going to be able to find it? On iTunes?
I don't even know how to release those things. Right now it's on Podbean, but you'll find it on our website. It'll be announced on raganiworld.com, RAGANI world.com. That's the website. And I'll certainly post it on there once it's released. And it'll be on our Facebook page as well. But
Cool.
I don't know how to release those things yet. It's brand new. Podcast is not something I've done before. So
Wonderful. And so what about how the world is now? What's your take on what's going on from a kind of higher level? Like,
this is really interesting to me. On a human level, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of emotions obviously coming to a head with struggles and pains. And, I sit in the morning and my prayers are now including those people in the hospital who are dying by themselves because they have no way of seeing their loved ones because they've got COVID, and their loved ones not being able to see them. I mean, the pain of knowing that your kids and your family, your parents, your siblings, your spouse can't even say goodbye to you or see you, is like the pain of that. It's like, it gets me choked up thinking about it.
Absolutely.
And I also feel, and I don't want this to come across sounding,
Don't worry about how you don't want it. You'll express it perfectly.
been trying to think of how to share this, because I've been observing when I sit. So I've done a daily meditation practice actually since I was 15. So the last 5 years.
Six years, Ragani. Come on.
6 years. I've been doing a morning meditation practice. I do an evening practice as well. In the morning, I tend to sit longer. And what I've observed is there's a feeling in the air, a fine quality in the air that is sustained. I even made a post on Facebook about this because I thought this is palpable. It's something that I'm feeling is being sustained as an energy. And it's hard to describe exactly what that is, but I used to describe it when I used to be married to Dr. Buegel, Dale Buegel, and we used to comment in the 20 years that we were together. We lived in a community that had a lot of very religious people. And we could always tell when there was some holiday we didn't know about, whether it was Christian or Jewish or whatever, because there
Right.
was a feeling in that air that was like, okay, someone's doing prayers around here, or something's happening on a bigger level. Or even when Amaji would visit, or somebody would visit town, we'd look on our calendar, like, what day is it? Oh, I wonder if Amaji's visiting. That's what it was. And then we'd find out who it was later.
Mm.
There's a quality about the air or about the ether, more the Akashic, I think, the feel, rather than just not the air that we're breathing, but the energy of the space
Right.
that I'm observing when I sit for meditation. It has a quality that is not only palpable, but it's more sustained, that feels like there's a prayer that's been ongoing. And I don't doubt that it's because there are so many daily meditations now happening around the world that it's starting to change some things.
Mm.
My bigger take on it, as in the part that I am having a little harder time how to share this, and I've wanted to post it on Facebook or just share it with the community. I'm really thinking how to do this is I actually feel there's a kind of joy in all the pain that's happening. And I attribute it to that feeling of what I call yoga, where there's a kind of sobering, a kind of discipline that's happening. Whether you want to do it or you're not, it's being imposed upon you if you're not choosing it yourself. But for many of us who are choosing it, there's a quality that happens when we have a discipline or when we have a practice that we're doing. And right now, we're all practicing self-isolation. Many of us are in isolation. We're by ourselves. We're not seeing our friends. If we do, we see them very little or through closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something that happens when we practice discipline. It creates that tapas, or that energy. We say that tapas, or like a little heat, or it generates a kind of fire. And I really feel there's something happening with this energy in the world right now that makes me feel more joy, even though at the same time there's pain. And the part that's hard to explain, I guess, is that it feels like there's, it feels like it's beautiful,
Yeah.
because it's giving us an exquisite feeling of waking up to something. We're no longer like how we dress, or there's nothing, the flashy things people wear, or going out to eat, or most of us are walking around without makeup or doing anything much to our hair. You
I've
saw
not
my
done much to
pants.
my hair today, Ragani, I'll tell you that. I just left it
Right.
natural.
Well, lucky for you,
Wild.
I showered before this one, but I can see, I don't know, in my video, I look like I'm a little red. It's like my camera, I have to get that, whatever that app was that the
That's
fellow
a
was telling
21-year-old redness. That's all it
me.
is.
It's the color from my screen. But there is something that I feel with all that's going on. Obviously, there's a lot of things that we're thinking about. It's a contemplative time. It's a reflective time. It's a mandatory meditation, as I said to one of my clients when we first started. She said, what are you going to do? I said, this is like a world mandatory reflection meditative period. There's
Right.
nothing you can do about it. You can go out and risk your life, or you can stay back and contemplate and meditate. I don't have a TV, so I get a lot more of that energy. I know, you have a TV going, it can kind of distract you from it. And I do know, as much as that's going on, there'll still be those temptations when there's not the things to distract us that are usually there. We'll focus on things like politics, or how terrible the things are going on with the world or the economy, and get all wrapped up in that as a way of like satisfying almost that craving people have for what we call the rajasic, or that sort of tumultuous energy that we have in the world. And if we
What
can
is that?
stop,
Why are people? I mean, it's one thing to have a habit pattern built around it, but it's
Mhm.
another thing to crave it. Like, is this something that's been given to us and pushed on us, and so we've become addicted to it, or is it something we're claiming? We're like saying, I want that bit of distraction. I want that. negative habit, or, you know, are we claiming it, or is it being put upon us? These
I think it's a
habits
little,
now we have to let go of.
it's a little of both, but if you look at what health it would be defined as, it's where you can have peace of your mind, peace in the heart. You sleep well, you feel good energy. It doesn't matter what age you are. I know we have a thing in our culture that, oh, I'm old, so I can't feel that. That's not true. If there's health, then the agitation of the mind isn't as likely to happen. You don't feel as prone to being seduced by the agitations of the mind or by the things of the world that are sort of agitating you or bringing you into that. In yoga, we talk about the three aspects: the rajas, which is the more agitated, active energy; the tamas, which is the sloth, tired, even more restful energy; and sattva, which is the middle energy, which we say in yoga we aspire to come to that place of sattva because it's peaceful. It doesn't agitate the mind. And so if someone tends towards rajas, or if they're eating things that will get them more agitated, like they're eating spicy foods or more onions or things that will tend to, or eating late at night, um, they'll tend to have a more rajasic mindset where they'll be drawn to things that, the scrambles that's going on in politics, the agitation of people fighting and bickering, and goodness, it went on here in Wisconsin with the election, where people were being sent out in the streets because they were fighting about, wanting to close it, not wanting to close it. And in the end, they sent people out into the streets to have an election. And then on the other hand, there's a tamasic energy, which is the more slothful energy that I think is equally as damaging or troubling for people. They can't get out of it. They feel depressed. They feel tired. They feel the energy is gone. And then they look at all the sadness that's going on, the loss that's going on, and then that's all drawn to them, and they see more of that. So be careful what you decide you want to look at, because it'll get bigger.
Right, right. Yeah, it's an interesting comparison there. That's sattva, did you say?
Sattva.
You know, because with Rona and Sierra, one of the thing they do is a project called Eden, which is a conscious couples gathering network. And what we were talking about is this notion that the smallest number is 3. It's Good Friday today. It's the holy Christian holiday, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. This trilogy, the notion that you have the yin and the yang, or the ida and the pingala, and then you have this kind of observer, the observer of the flow of duality. That having kind of sacred sovereignty in the fire, and then in the compression, and then the observer of both, allows for a kind of greater peace, greater yoga, greater union.
Yes. It's the difference between a dynamic vantage point that's moving and one that's still, that then can see more clearly. And you talked about Ida and Pingala, the two that circle, that go up and down the spine and, come through the nostrils and go down. And then the Sushumna, which goes up the middle, when that one's open, that's usually where people, when the nostrils are switching, it's usually where people will have insights, or they feel like, oh, I can just meditate. I don't know what it was. I had the best meditation ever, because both were balanced and they were in that center point where it was very still, and takes them into that place.
It's also known as the Jed, right? The Jed.
The Jed? I hadn't heard that word before.
Central column, where the term Jedi came from.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And also there are other words that are similar to it, like Medai, which means the central column, the central post that you tie cattle to when they roam around a circle. The Medai, the central column, the non-moving vantage point, as you
Yes. Yes. Non-moving vantage point.
Like that.
Yes.
So, and so then in this, time, how would you okay, so people are having to deal with the death, in a way, of their habit patterns, whether they chose them or whether it was put on them, and a forced meditation. What else can you recommend people look at this time? Because of course, a lot of people are going to be engaging in avoidance behavior to try and fill the gaps of the habits that are missing. What are some other practices
as I just touched my face. Don't touch your face.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Don't touch your face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
I've
think
been
it's
making
okay for
some,
you because you're inside your apartment,
what's
and
that?
you're inside your apartment, so touching your face is actually all right because you know your
I
hands.
am inside my apartment, and I'm still careful, just knowing that I've touched things that have come in from the outside, like groceries and
Oh,
whatnot.
we
So,
have a whole quarantine section. We're not
yeah,
allowed to touch it for 5 days.
right?
Yeah, if I
Is
go
that wrong?
out, I have to come in and take all my clothes off and wash them.
I
That's
do. I
that's
do. I know there's all kinds of questions about it, whether it's on clothes or not, and I just do more laundry these days, keep things clean to be sure. I sleep better at night that way.
right, right.
But yeah, I think that's a valid question, and obviously there's this period will mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It will certainly be remembered by everybody, but
Mm.
it'll mean different things. Some people are on the scale of losing their loved ones or losing their own life. I mean, to the point where like this is it for them.
And losing a livelihood, if they're a small business owner, or and
Right,
even potentially losing your own house. I mean,
right. There's a lot of things going on at this time. And yet, if you speak to people who've been through the Great Depression, and there's some of them still around, there's people who've been through different kinds of traumas that, I mean, we went through something smaller, Y2K, everybody was worried about it, everything happened, then it went through and nothing happened. Well, now we're going through something that's going to be remembered. And I think it always helps to remember that we're still going to exist after. I
mm,
think there's sort of a fatalistic feeling when people, especially when they're, like our generation really hasn't been through a lot of that. We haven't been through a plague before. We haven't been through anything. I mean, we've had little things here and there with, the water got polluted once, don't drink the water, or things that would happen. But this is a bigger one, and this is really touching a lot of places and people that need to be adjusted, need to be reflected upon. And as painful as it is to go through that, there's a kind of maturing process that happens when we have to walk through that fire. And it's going to take us through the fire whether we want it to or not, because it's here and we're walking through it. We have to. So either by choice we walk through or we don't. But it's a really good time to start reflecting. If people, obviously, there's concerns about having enough money, having enough, livelihood. Can you make sure you have enough roof over your house, that you can pay your utilities, that you have transportation? Those are some of the basic things. You have food. Those things need to be in place. And for some people, maybe that didn't put money aside, this is a wake-up call.
mm,
I need to do a better job with that for the finances for myself. I need to figure out how to protect myself. So when this happens, this is not going to go on forever. It's going to end. I guarantee it. It's going to come to an end. But while we're in it, it feels like there's a lot of things changing that will never be the same again. And some of those things will be our old habit patterns that we're now getting a wake-up call to.
right,
If it's not finances, it might be relationships. Some people are in their house living with somebody that they haven't had to spend that amount of time with.
right.
And now they're realizing, my God, I don't really know this person, or I'm not sure this is a good fit for me. Or maybe it's a new relationship where they've just met and now they're having to go through this transition of learning about each other. Or so this might be a relationship quarantine for some people where they reflect upon the people in their life and think, okay, so this is interesting. Now that a lot of people are cut out physically from my life, what is it that's serving me, and what kind of people do I have around me? Because we become like the people that are around us. And
Right.
it helps to think, what is it that we want to foster in ourselves? What kind of integrity, what kind of heart energy or kindness, do we have people around that we would idealize or emulate, that we want to become like? So a lot of these things are reflective, but I'm pretty sure that everybody watching this will know exactly what issues it's hitting for them. You don't have to struggle hard to think, well, is it something that's financial or more relationship? You know right away. It's like, oh, I know where that hits. I know where it falls. I know what kinds of things this is talking to me about. And if it's not those things, it may be something else of, what am I doing in this location? Why am I still here? I don't want to be in a place, physically here where I can't enjoy my surroundings. Why do I not have a more comfortable place? whatever it might be, I think it's time to reflect on that and start to look at what's the baseline. You've got some time here. What's the baseline you want to create? For those people who are still working, there are some obviously who are working harder now because of what's going on, and they don't have that time to reflect. But for those who do, this is really precious time.
Precious, right?
I
And
know,
it seems like we should, in a way, be grateful for it.
yes. It took, I'd say, the first 10 days or so of this process, I couldn't seem to feel any motivation to do anything. I was doing a bunch of silly videos. I did one on how to fry up toilet paper and put it on YouTube to be silly.
How to what?
Hi.
How to what?
Fry up toilet paper. You have all these extra rolls. You should watch it. It's on YouTube now. It's crazy. I was doing some crazy videos just to get people laughing
Right.
and was enjoying it, but really wasn't feeling how to focus myself. And I knew I wanted to, but the energy, I think it was a lot of the energy of what was going on in the world around. I don't even watch the news and I was still feeling it. And so now it feels like many of us have kind of settled into or gotten more accustomed to what can our daily routine look like? How can we take care of ourselves physically? What we're eating, how do we get the exercise we need to do, and taking care of some basic things. And then what do you want to do with that time? Because this really is a special, precious time, and you will remember it years down the road. And if you come out of it with something saying, that's the point at which I decided I'm going to live with integrity. I'm going to be a kinder person, whatever it might be, you decide. And from that forward, that's what you can do with yourself. It's up to you.
So it's like really dive into the fire of it. Really let the burning happen. So that again, this is themes come up in these talks that I've been doing. And themes are the obvious philosophical realizations, which is that the universe is constantly churning in on itself and eating itself and growing itself out, the phoenix from the ashes.
Mm-hmm.
And really as perspective holders that we are, we can either resist and kind of fight and be pulled anyway, as you say, into the vortex, churned up, no! And come out the other side doing the same, no! And then we just sort of cycle around until no! Keep cycling around, or dive into it, full-hearted, full embrace, through into the warp tunnel of the churn, and somewhere the grace, it feels, again, that keeps coming up, the term, the grace.
Grace. When there's a practice, and I mentioned tapas earlier, if you are about to do something that you feel some little voice, listening to that little voice within it's been silenced for so long for many of us. We go about the life, we do the things we want to do, but now it's a time it's quieter. You can start to hear that little voice. And as we do that, if there's something we're about to do that we know on some level we feel maybe I shouldn't do that. Let's, for instance, you're about to say something to someone and you think, oh, I just want to say it because it's true. But there's something in you that says, I probably shouldn't because it's not kind. And if you hold back for that moment and you resist saying that, you'll feel what we call a little bit of heat that is generated in the body. That's part of the tapas. When you do something that is with integrity, or you do something to hold yourself to a process, to some standard that you want, or some standard isn't really the right word, but you decide, you make a decision and you hold yourself to that, and you're about to stray and go outside of that, and then you hold yourself, you'll feel a little bit of heat, and it's almost like, ooh, you don't want to feel it. It's a little agitating. It feels like a little heat, but if you pay attention, notice where that heat comes. In yoga, we say that's part of what's then purifying. It's a purification process. Part of that tapas is the purifying of stepping back and let the burn.
It's like a burny burn.
When you said that, it brought that right back. The burn, let the burn come,
Right.
and be okay with it.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had a download as things are happening. When you sit in presence and you listen carefully, there are gifts in the grace, in the reflection. And I was sitting in the sattva, and observing my reaction to these points. And then I admitted it to the world, to the universe, to myself, that it was me, that I was holding, that I was angry, that I was upset, and it burned like a hole in my heart. And I sat and I breathed and I allowed it, and I'm like, ow, yes, oh, ow. And then I realized that I wasn't breathing in comparison to when I was breathing and that pain and that burn was happening. The breath was so deep and so full and so surrendery that in comparison to every other moment in my life, I wasn't breathing. Like the other moments weren't breathing, whereas that was the first breath, like that.
Wow, it opened something up.
Yeah. And
Wow.
then allow the grace to be. I mean, you have no choice. As you say, it's the same as the universe churning. You either control the grace or stop it or allow it, or you either notice the subtle everything of grace, or you distract yourself with habits and noise and all the other stuff going on in the universe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how we want distraction. And what happens if you don't go towards a distraction, what will you find?
Why do we want distraction?
So we say it's part of the mind in
Right.
the yoga, the chitta, the mind that just kind of chatters and wants to just be entertained and flit about here and there. But it doesn't allow you to stay in that center point. And if you can pull yourself out of that for just a moment, even I call it these 2-minute meditations in the middle of the day when you're going about and you have this thought, oh, about the 2-minute meditation, completely stop everything, sit down and just stop for 2 minutes. It does something different
Absolutely.
when you do that during the day, and not just listening. People will hear that and go, oh, what a great idea, but actually do it. 2-minute meditation. 2 minutes. What's 2 minutes? We could do it a couple times a day.
And I think the fear is what is holding us into the habit patterns of distraction. Because in the meditation, you're sitting in that sattva, you're sitting in the observer, which is neither yin nor yang. It's neither burning or cooling. It's the observer, and there the ego loses its definition. It's like it loses its power. And then, of course, the ego interchanged with the word personality. It loses something in the observer, and then there's a fear of oh, what, I'm losing, I'm dying, I'm disappearing, and I think that's why we continue this chitta, this mind distraction, is out of fear. So maybe another reflection for people is be courageous. Be courageous. Sit for 2 minutes in meditation a day. I mean, in the middle of the day, do 2 minutes. When you first wake up, do 10 minutes.
Yeah. And in the end, I feel there's only love. You know, when we think of what we came out of and what we're going into, and when there's fear, it's just that we've forgotten that. And we've gone into that place where we're running around like this little mouse scared of things and forgetting that, holy moly, you know, the moment we leave this plane, this physical plane, we fall back into that love that we came out of and that we forget. We think we're these separate little beings, you know, doing our separate little things. And this is a beginning, this whole Corona thing, I think, is a beginning of that, being able to feel ourselves moving as one, or moving as a unit, realizing that what I'm doing is affecting you, even though you're all the way across the country. Where are you now?
Oh, San Rafael, North Bay.
San Rafael. Okay. Yeah, and even what I'm doing here can affect you. You know, we think about cell phones. I think this is so interesting that I've often used these as examples, that it's the size of what, 4 inches? It's not attached to anything. It's not tied into anything. And we can talk into it. We can whisper into it. And it goes out into the air. It doesn't get magnified. Somebody who's standing across the street won't hear me.
Right.
but it goes out into the air and then it goes to somebody else's little 4-inch device
Yeah.
directly into theirs, not into anybody else's.
Right.
It's a miracle. I mean, it's truly like you talk about the yoga sciences. I think we're practicing with cell phones what we do with each other when we ping each other by thinking about each other.
Right. Right.
And you do that with a cell phone and you practice enough and then you realize, oh, isn't that funny? I was just thinking of so and so and they texted me. Well,
Right.
no, that's why, because you picked up that they were thinking of you. But we aren't taught that that's what we pay attention to in this culture. And so if we can start doing that, I mean, cell phones have always amazed me. I sort of feel like I'm in dream time since they've come out. I mean, I look at mine and I'm kind of like giddy, like this is something from Star Trek. It's
Right.
not attached to anything, people. It's not attached to anything.
Uh,
And yet I can magically touch a little formula on the surface, whisper into it, and somebody in China can hear me in real time like that.
Right.
Or they can see a picture of me.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it
like,
went through the
what
air.
my laptop is not connected to anyone. Or anything.
Yeah. Nor is, well, mine is because it's plugged in,
Right. Well,
but it's
that's
not connected.
power, isn't it? It's not that. It's not going through there.
It's not connected to anything. And it's amazing because you think, well, it goes onto the ether, but our mind conceives of going out there means if you took a bullhorn, there's no way you could shout loud enough that you could hear me, or I could hear you all the way from where you are. It goes out and it dissipates. How does it work? We have ways of describing it. But when people say to me, I don't have any miracles in my life, I was like, you're carrying one with you every single day. If you don't contemplate that and get to that point to see, that's the other piece is we can do all these things to help our mind here, but I think people are ultimately hungry for something spiritual and something related to love because that's what we came out of. And if we can connect people into that and start to understand that there are signs everywhere we are of things that are extraordinary. And these cell phones are the biggest example I have that I like people to think about is how does it work? You literally, I could whisper in here and you could hear me. I could whisper this quietest little whisper and you could hear me.
The interesting thing about the phones, just from the physics point of view, is that it converts it into light, into radio waves, basically, which is photons of light on the electromagnetic spectrum. And we as living beings generate those same magnetic and electromagnetic fields
Yes.
that, again, go out and magnetically, in particular, they leave our body as if the body wasn't even there. Any flow of electricity through a spiral wire basically generates a right angle magnetic field. It's Ampere's law. It's one of the earliest laws of physics. And our entire body is built up of that. So if I think of you now, the thought pattern that is you, that has the shared experiences we've got and my other experiences of you, and all the things that's Ragani entangled, that activates a neural pathway, a particular Ragani neural pathway, which creates a subsequent magnetic field, which is identical to the neural pathway. So your Ragani specific identity is generated in the same science as a mobile phone does. It converts it into a magnetic field and pulses light, basically. It's just with your phone is sending light to a particular cell tower and that sends it to a satellite and then it transfers it over. It's just directed.
So
Our thought one is more magical, it's more entangled.
yes. So, and this is what's interesting is we can use light and things to describe what's happening. We have ways of describing it with science. When I brought this into one of the workshops I did at Rancho La Puerta in Mexico a few years ago, there was a fellow who actually developed cell phones in the audience or in the group that I was working with. And his wife kind of pointed him out when I said, does anybody really understand how these work? And she poked him out and said, he does. And so I said to him, so how does it really work? And he said, it's magic. And he wasn't saying it to be joking, but what was interesting to me is that we can describe it as light. We know that it goes up to satellites that we don't see through the air, but we don't see it, and it's as light. But what is it that's actually happening if we were to take it out of that realm of how we describe it? What is it that's happening, and where do we feel it? Because we can feel it on some level with ourselves, usually with our heart, We can feel that energy of what's going on, or we get an impulse through our mind. My teacher used to do that. He'd practice calling us without physically calling us to see if we would respond, or to see how we would respond if he called us to certain places to show up, if we would actually show up there. And practicing hearing, like, okay, how do I know, was that something from an outside source, or was that something I was thinking? And one way of distinguishing it for me was, did it have a train of thought that led to it? If it had a train of thought that led to it, it was likely something that I generated, meaning I'm cooking something for dinner. Oh, I had this dinner with so and so last time I ate this food. Now I'm thinking of that person. As opposed to, I'm doing something unrelated and suddenly it pops in, this person thing pops in my head. Then I realize, oh, that person probably just thought of me. They may not realize I'm receiving it, but they may be about to text me, or maybe they just thought of me and it was fleeting so much that it didn't connect for them. The dots didn't connect, but they would say, oh, it's funny, I was just thinking of you if I were to call them. So the little distinguishing couple things that I learned with my teacher just in doing that, of trying to tease out, how do I know if that was a thought I had that he called, or that he actually called me? Because they feel very similar.
Yeah. And it's a sort of listening, right? As you said.
A different way of listening, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so with cell phones, how do we really explain? We could say it's with light, or it's with sound, or that it goes up to satellites we don't see, but what is actually happening? Because it's truly phenomenal that we speak into it, or we get an image into it, and it's like it sends it out there, but it's not anything we can see, and for all we know, it's dissipated, and yet they're crossing, and it goes exactly into the place that we magically pushed a little code on our phone. It goes magically into somebody else's that we intended it to go to, usually.
Pure magic.
Pure magic.
Ragani, it's been lovely. Thank you so much for coming on and spreading your light. How do people find you? RaganiWorld.com, they can find you there?
RaganiWorld.com, they can find me there, find our music there. I know you asked me about music as we started, and we didn't even go into any of the music.
Right. Yeah, because you're a musician as well. You sing sacred music.
Yes, lots of music. And there's we're doing something now, if people are doing yoga teachings, or if they're doing anything virtual and they want some music, I'm actually giving away the album, the Light of Savitri album, the Gayatri album that we had. I'm giving that to anybody with a license to use it. They just can't sell it commercially, but they can use it in anything they want. Because I know there's a lot of anybody, doctors, nurses. I'm happy to send it out to anybody.
Well, I might take you up on the offer. I might record some meditations for people.
Happy to.
Good meditation background music?
Sure. Yeah, this is actually different than the kirtan that we do. It doesn't have a beat. It's very stripped down. So Hans Christian has a lot of the instrumentals behind me. I also created some drones, but it's just drone, and then more Indian style, alap, kind of the that kind of feel to it.
Right. Kind of I've forgotten their name. Totally forgotten them. Anyway, the group, doesn't matter. Yes, perfect. Sounds wonderful. And people can find that and then contact you on Ragani World.
Yes. Yeah, they can find, and they can download the albums there too. We've got kirtan, lots of different things, and some upbeat songs. But yeah. Take care of everybody. Take care of each other out there. This is a unique and special time, not to be wasted. It's one of those truly times that you can go inside and start to look at what is it that you want to do in this life, because we're only here for a short time. And yeah, some of them we don't
the
know.
Metaphorical inside, not the inside your house, which you're already in.
Right.
That was inside the inside of your.
Or within.
Within squared.
Within, right. Right.
Ragani, thank you so much for coming on and coming on Good Friday.
Thank you.
And being
Good Friday. And I'm only sorry that my lighting, I had to move the background is not so pleasant here because my light didn't work actually. So I'm glad.
Don't worry about it. My live stream didn't work. So,
I know it was a day of technical difficulties, but so it still worked. Somehow we managed it. So thank you.
Someone will blame Mercury somewhere.
Right. It must be retrograde, right?
Okay, Ragani, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for
Much
having me.
blessings and peace, and so lovely to see you
Good to see you again.
shining your grace.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you so much. And thank you. And that's it from me. Friday. Again, as Dad tells me, I have to plug my book. I've got a book, bookevolve.com. Blessings, stay safe, have a wonderful weekend. Thank you to my guests, Ragani. Remember, it is all about sacred presence. Be brave, you've got it. It's all there for you. Just don't need to distract yourself. Be with it, you've got it. Thank you, much love. See you all soon.